Now, the two of you, your companies, Vireo and Columbia Care, operate in multiple states. So are there lessons learned from other states that you really strongly feel should be adopted here, or lessons learned that we need to avoid? If you could maybe just talk about one or two.
At Columbia Care, I represent New York specifically. I know that we as a company, definitely have used other models and learned from those mistakes. There is a lot of, hoops and boundaries that we have to go through to make things work. But we're trying to constantly just improve the program and make it the best that we can.
We have dispensaries in Minnesota and New York. And part of my job is to oversee the ones in Minnesota as well. When I started, that wasn't my job. And, there are a million lessons that we learned from Minnesota. This is a brand new space that really, despite all the regulations, a lot of us are just, trying to create things as we move along. And, even from a medical perspective, interaction with providers, looking at potentially allergic reactions. There's just a million examples of lessons that were learned. And when we're talking about seed to sale, right, that's a very long continuum that there are lessons in each one of those steps that I guarantee we took those from all the practice that happened in Minnesota to try to not make those same mistakes in New York.
Okay, thanks. And now you'd referenced, interaction with medical providers about things like drug allergies. So certainly what I have learned is that in each of these states, the medical model about how the patient interacts with the physician and how that physician interacts with the dispensaries is very different from state to state. If I'm not mistaken, New York was actually the first state that required physicians got any training that were going to be doing certifications. Secondly, I believe, but I might be wrong, New York was the first state, if not the only state, that also required that physicians not only certify a patient, meaning that you see them, you examine them, and you certify them saying that yes, their condition would benefit from medical cannabis, and yes, you do fit the legal parameters of whatever state you're operating in. But really, New York took it a step further to say now that physician also has to recommend a certain product. And in New York, that means the ratios of THC to CBD, whether one is greater than the other or they're equal, what route, meaning in New York, are we going to vape an oil, are we going to take an oral oil, or swallow an oral capsule? And lastly, you had mentioned, Tricia, milligrams. So how strong of the product and how often are we taking that? So again, different from state to state. In your opinion or your vision, what should the medical model look like?
I truly believe New York actually has a good handle on how this should go for other states in terms of the way that the pharmacist actually interacts with the doctor. It allows the doctor to have more insight of how it's actually treating their patient. In other states, it's, they write a prescription and they say go to the dispensary, and they never know what their patients really end up taking. So I think the communication that we have with physicians is very, very important. I've done a lot of physician education and really trying to destigmatize amongst the medical community what medical marijuana is. A lot of physicians would not adapt to a program that did have flower or that seemed to have more recreational type of names. So I think that when they see the products and they look very pharmaceutical, that they're starting to adapt to it a lot more and have a much more open mind about it.
And interacting with physicians is probably one of the most challenging aspects of my job because the vast majority are not a Dr. Bernie. And you could only imagine that this is an uncharted territory that is incredibly scary. Does my malpractice cover this? Right, let's start right there. I'm going to have to pay $250 to do extra training to be able to recommend this, that there's going to be an iPhone line out my front door of people trying to get medicine, and it's going to take extra time out of my schedule. Who's going to do all this paperwork? My front desk is going to I could keep going. So there's just a tremendous resistance from the physician community, but you find the physicians that want to do what's right for their patient. And a couple of them test out the waters and see how this impacts their patient, especially a patient that had no hope before, or a patient that is just severe pain, that this is the first time that they had a handle on their pain, or their quality of life improves, or their nausea went away for the first time. And it's those little steps in that right direction that to be in this industry here in New York, you have to be the eternal optimist, because there's a tremendous tide that just keeps pushing back. And every day we're all out there trying to clear the stigma and the taboo that surrounds this, and say, look at this in an objective lens to utilize in the treatment of patients with severe disease.